So we're at war. And I just want to throw a question out to you to think about. Just in case I get boring with the scriptural stuff, you can think about this question. Right after Thanksgiving, there was an event held in New York City that's held every year. Every year in New York City, after Thanksgiving, to kick off the Christmas shopping season, there is a Christmas tree lighting at Rockefeller Plaza. Everyone aware of that? Right? Big event. People bring their families, and they have this massive Christmas tree, and that's the kickoff to the Christmas shopping season. And this year, at the Christmas tree lighting in Rockefeller Plaza, there was a violent demonstration by pro-Hamas, anti-Israel activists who were screaming, they were chanting, "Christmas is canceled," and then the other regular anti-Israel genocidal slogans like "from the river to the sea," etc. This wasn't an isolated incident. In London, during the Christmas shopping season this year, there were similar violent demonstrations of pro-Hamas, anti-Israel activists disrupting the Christmas shopping in Piccadilly Circus and Oxford Street in the main shopping district in London. Also screaming similar slogans about Christmas being canceled and then the usual pro-Hamas, anti-Israel slogans. And in Italy, in Rome, every year there's a big opera house called the La Scala Opera, which every year has an annual Christmas pageant, a Christmas performance. And at the La Scala Opera this year, the Christmas performance was interrupted by anti-Israel, pro-Hamas demonstrators who came into the opera hall, went up on stage, and disrupted the Christmas performance. And a few weeks ago, on Easter Sunday, at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, the Easter Mass was interrupted by pro-Hamas, anti-Israel demonstrators. Now, why am I mentioning all this? Because I'm going to state the obvious. Jews don't celebrate Christmas or Easter. Right? Jews don't celebrate Christmas. We're not Christian. Israel has a 2% Christian minority. They live with freedom, and they're actually a flourishing minority. But Israel's a Jewish state. Why does it make sense to our enemies to demonstrate against Israel by disrupting Christmas and Easter? It's not stupid. You see, I understand. Yeah, it's stupid. It's kind of like the Queers for Palestine thing, right? Like, don't they know that if they were there, they'd be like, right? Whenever we laugh at our enemies and think that they're fools, we miss what's really going on. Because we stop thinking about it. We just go, oh, they're idiots. I'm asking a serious question. And try to answer it for yourself. Go home today and think about it. Why does it make sense to them? Because it obviously makes perfect sense to them. In their minds, it makes perfect sense to demonstrate against Christmas because of their hatred for the state of Israel, which is not a Christian country. Think about that question. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, I'm sorry, I'm not going in the order that I told you the scriptures. Whoever you are who's handling my scriptures. I don't know where you are. You're up there, right? So let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It's a famous passage in Ecclesiastes which has this long list of things that it's a time for, right? And it's a whole passage. You go to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, read from the beginning. A time for love, a time for hate, right? That's up there. A time to build, a time to destroy. For everything there is a season. It's one of the most well-known passages in the Bible. It almost sounds like a nursery rhyme. And the last line of it says, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. It sounds pretty simple. Time for war, time for peace. Folks, this verse, it looks simple, but it's actually a very, very challenging verse. Let me explain. This verse was not written to two different people. It was written to each and every one of us. And the point of the verse is to say that you need to know what time it is. Because if it is a time for war, and you think it's a time for peace, and you treat it like a time for peace, you are going to make grave mistakes. Now, the same is true in the reverse. If it's a time for peace and you think it's a time for war, and we all know people like that, maybe some of us are people like that, you'll also make mistakes. But the point is you need to know what time it is. Now, we like a time for peace, right? We're people of faith, and we like peace, and we want to work towards peace, and peace is comfortable, and it's nice. And we want it to be a time for peace. We want to act that way. And we don't get to choose when it changes from a time for peace to a time for war. Our enemies have a say in that. But when that shift happens, we better make that pivot. And if we don't make that pivot, we're going to be looking through the wrong lens. We're going to see things in a warped way because it's a time for war and we're still thinking it's a time for peace. Now, do you understand what I mean? That this is a very challenging verse. It's not an easy pivot to make. It's a pivot we resist. We want it to be a time for peace. We like that. And if we insist on staying there and it's a time for war, God help us. And I'm not only talking about what's going on in Israel, on our borders with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. I'm also talking about what's going on in this country, what's going on worldwide, what's going on in the complex, sick, and twisted relationship between our government and the Chinese Communist Party. I don't want to get too political. I mean, I do, but I'm not going to. We have to understand what time it is. And that's what I'm here today to discuss for the next few minutes. Because how do we think about war? What is the Bible? Does the Bible tell us how to think about war? Is there a theology of war? And the answer is there is. And to understand war, the meaning of war, and specifically the meaning of this war, we'll turn to a psalm. A psalm that it looks like was written for this war that Israel's fighting. Like it's been sitting for 3,000 years or so, waiting to be relevant, and it describes the war that we're in right now. And that's Psalm 83. Before we read through the psalm, before we look at it, I just want to tell you a little bit about this psalm and its importance currently. On October 7th, when Hamas attacked, there was a young man who was in one of the elite commando units in the Israeli army who was killed in one of those kibbutzes outside of Gaza that was hit hardest, Kfar Aza. And he was one of the initial response teams that went in there to fight the terrorists. His name is Yosef Malachi Gedalia. Yosef Malachi Gedalia's father, David, is one of my best friends. We grew up together. Yosef Malachi Gedaliah's grandfather, David's father, and my father were college roommates. Our families have been connected for a long time. You know, you have these family friends that you're so close to, you almost feel like your cousins. It's one of those families. So Yosef Malachi was killed in Kfar Aza fighting the terrorists that day. A beautiful young man that I watched grow up. He had recently gotten married. He was a newlywed. And I went to his funeral at the military cemetery on Mount Herzl in the early days of the war, a few days after he was killed. And at the funeral, the Israeli army rabbi, the chaplain who was officiating, read Psalm 83. And I was like, that's interesting. And the reason I thought that is that if you've already opened Psalm 83 and you're bored by what I'm saying, so you're reading it already, you know that it's not a mournful psalm. It's not a psalm that you would associate with a funeral. This isn't Psalm 23. Okay, it has nothing to do with what you'd expect to read at a funeral. And so I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I asked someone next to me, why is he reading Psalm 83? And I was told something that I did not know, which is that Psalm 83 is read at the funeral of every Israeli soldier who falls in combat. And that was a decision made decades ago that I was not aware of. So I went home and I took out my Bible and I read Psalm 83 very carefully. And if you've learned anything from me over the years, I say it all the time. You got to read the Bible carefully. Amen. Right? Because even people who read the Bible, so many of us don't read the Bible carefully, asking all those questions that you've heard me ask here. Why does it say that? Noticing all kinds of anomalies in the text, taking them seriously. So I read Psalm 83 and I was stunned. Because I said, oh my gosh, going back to what I said about Ecclesiastes, this psalm tells us how to think about war. And if it's a time for war, this is the psalm we have to read. And then sure enough, a few days later, something happened that has never happened in any of Israel's previous wars. Even though this psalm has been read at the funerals of every Israeli soldier who falls in combat for decades, the chief rabbis of Israel made a declaration that they'd never made in past wars. They called on all the synagogues in Israel to start praying Psalm 83 every day, in addition to our other daily prayers, to add in Psalm 83. It was a very interesting announcement, because as you'll see as we go through it, this psalm is not only about war, it's about this war. So let's take a look. Is it up here? We got the first verse up there? Okay. Oh, I see. I have it up here. Do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace. Do not be still, O God. Let's keep going. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. Now that's interesting. Your enemies and those who hate you. Right? We have two different phrases here. Your enemies and those who hate you. What's the difference between your enemies and those who hate you? Isn't that a Rabbi Wolicki type of question? Right? What's the difference between that? Your enemies and those who hate you. Sounds like, is this just redundant? No such thing. So your enemies are the ones who actually attack. Those who hate you, they're not actually physically attacking, but they're just declaring their hatred for you. So I believe that this is describing this strange alliance that we have today in the world. And I alluded to it before. What on earth do atheist, Marxist leftists have in common with devout Muslim fundamentalists? Why are they working together? Why are they on the same team? Because it's an alliance of those who attack us and those who hate God. That's the alliance. Those who are your enemies and those who hate you. But now, let's step back for a second and ask a simple question. We're talking about, let's read another verse. It'll become clear. I'll ask this question then. Let's keep going. They have taken crafty counsel against your people. and consulted together against your sheltered ones. One more verse. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. Now, I don't know if you picked this up, we referred to the enemies of God as the enemies of Israel, that the people who attack Israel are your enemies, God. Now, that's a pretty arrogant thing for us to say as a member of the people of Israel, right? I mean, how arrogant is that? People who hate me, they're God's enemies. Why is that? Oh, you can say, oh, well, we're God's chosen people, but let me explain. There is a phrase that appears in the Bible a lot, especially in the book of Ezekiel, incidentally. In the book of Ezekiel, it's a very common phrase, but it appears all over the Bible. And you've seen it before when you read the Bible, you kind of gloss over it, where God will say something and then say, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Or, and you shall know that I am the Lord, right? Over and over again. In other words, it's God's way of saying, this is how you know me. If you look up that phrase, take out a concordance and look up where that phrase appears in the Bible, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Where does God say that based on people will know that he's God? Almost every time, not every time, but the vast majority of the times that phrase appears in the Bible, the context is the ingathering of the people of Israel to our land after a long exile. The redemption of Israel. That's almost always the context. Where God says, there's other ways to know God, but the most common is the ingathering of Israel. Now, why is that the way to see God? If I just came into church this morning and said, how do you know God? How do you see him in the world? We could have a whole conversation. We could have all kinds of different answers. But God tells us over and over again in the Bible that the best way to see him, to know that he is God, is to see the redemption of the people of Israel. Now, why? Why is that the best way to see God in the world? It's not just Jews being arrogant and saying, we're God's people. Let me explain. You see, the most repeated prophecy in the Bible, by far, is that same prophecy, that the people of Israel will go into exile for a long time and will ultimately be redeemed and brought back and rebuild themselves as a nation. That is the most repeated prophecy in the Bible. It's also the most outlandish prophecy in the Bible. The fact that it's happened, and we live in a time where the people of Israel have been ingathered by the millions, and the state of Israel was reborn 76 years ago, and here we are. So we think it's normal, and I've talked about this in this church before, it's not normal. Many, many nations in the ancient world went into exile. Tons of them. That's why you read about all these ancient peoples in books like the Bible. These ancient books, you see all these names of nations that don't exist anymore. Right? Where are all those people? They didn't all die out and get replaced by us. They lost their national identities. They went into exile, and nations that went into exile never, ever returned. Never. So, empires would sweep across the world, they conquer smaller peoples, they chop off the heads of all the fighting age males, and they send everyone into exile. And they'd mix up the peoples. And they did that because it's much easier to do that than to rule over them in their homeland. So nations were constantly getting exiled in the ancient world, and none of them ever returned. They would dream about going home for a generation or two. They'd ultimately learn new languages and assimilate and mix, and new national identities were born. So when Moses predicted for the first time in Deuteronomy 30, but then all the other prophets repeated it, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, all of them, that the people of Israel, after a long exile, would come back and reconstitute themselves as a people in their land. It was an outlandish, ridiculous prophecy. It was like predicting water running uphill. So God says, if you watch that happen, you will know that I am God, because that is a crazy prophecy. That is a wild miracle. That violates all the rules of history. So pay attention to that and you'll know that I am God. See, the Jewish people's purpose is not the Jewish people. We are a pawn that God uses to reveal himself to the world. So those who try to prevent that prophecy from being fulfilled, Those who stand against the reconstitution of the nation of Israel in our land are standing against the entire narrative of the Bible. They're standing against God's purposes. So the enemies of Israel are God's enemies because they're trying to prevent that big event that reveals him to the world. And they shall know that I am the Lord, they're trying to stop that. That's why the enemies of Israel are the enemies of God. Let's keep going. Oh no, actually we have to focus on that verse for a sec. Go back. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. That's a very interesting phrase. Notice it doesn't say, come let us wipe them out. They want to cut us off from being a nation. You hear this a lot now. This is perfect for right now. Because what are the enemies of Israel saying now? They're not openly saying, kill all the Jews. They're saying the state of Israel is illegitimate. Right? They're fine with Jews being kind of scattered in the exile, being a religion. But a nation? No. This is from the river to the sea. This is the original. Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. This is like what's being chanted on college campuses right now. Keep going. For they have consulted together with one account. They form a confederacy against you. Again, it's not one group of enemies, it's different enemies who've come together. That's why they've formed a confederacy. Now, here, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to run through this next piece and point out one very, very big verse. What we're going to have now is a list of nations that come up against the Jewish people, okay? And they're all ancient peoples. Again, this is going to be another Rabbi Wolicki moment. We're going to see something, if we read carefully, we're going to see something amazing in this verse. The tents of Edom and Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, keep going with me, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Stop there. Let's go back to the beginning of this list. Go back a verse. Now, track with me here, okay? The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, keep going, Gebal, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Okay, you guys know me, my nitpicky rabbinic way of reading biblical text. Why in my list do I have and with? Why'd we change from and to with? It's just a list of nations, right? Everyone see that? And with. So who's Philistia and Tyre? Now, obviously, there's some special bond that these two nations have with each other, and it's being highlighted by the Bible changing from and to with. That's the Bible's way of saying, mark this spot with an X and dig. Anyone know where Philistia is? Anyone know? Where did the Philistines live? Hello? It's called the Gaza Strip. That's Philistia. That's the Philistine territory. Anyone know where Tyre is? Anyone know where it is? It's in South Lebanon. Hello? The Gaza Strip and South Lebanon? Have you read the paper today? This is literally the two fronts that Israel's fighting on right now. The two fronts that rockets are being fired at Israel on a daily basis. And by the way, a couple days ago was Israel's Independence Day, Tuesday. And I was in Ashkelon. We have a place in Ashkelon. Ashkelon is the nearest city to Gaza on the coast. We have a beautiful home there right on the beach. And we invited our extended family to come to celebrate. And we were in synagogue that morning in Ashkelon. And it was Israel's Independence Day. So we were singing the Psalms, the Hallel Psalms that I wrote this book about, which we sing on all festive days. And we're in the synagogue in Ashkelon singing the Psalms, praising God for the state of Israel, and an air raid siren goes off because there were rockets being fired at our neighborhood. And we just kept singing, and everyone in the synagogue just sort of, while we're singing, walks over to the bomb shelter, singing praises to God for the state of Israel in the bomb shelter with the air raid sirens. It was just like, I was like, man, you cannot make this up. This is the moment we live in, all in one, right there in front of you. But Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Here's the psalmist writing 3,000 years ago about a war to destroy the nation of Israel, where different enemies of Israel come together against us to prevent God from being revealed. And it tells us that there's a special bond in this war between the Gaza Strip and South Lebanon. It's right there. Let's keep reading. Assyria also has joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot, Selah. Keep going. And then we ask God to deal with them as he dealt with the other enemies of Israel. We're gonna gloss over this. Keep going. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to skip. Okay, one more. Keep going. This is just a list of other nations that God wiped out. We asked God do this. And if we had more time, we would delve into each of these nations and what exactly does it mean. We could give a 2-hour lecture on this psalm. We're not going to do that today. They said, our enemies said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. They, of course, want our land. Oh, my God, make them like the whirling dust, like chaff before the wind. So we want to completely get rid of our enemies. As the fire burns in the woods and the flame sets the mountains on fire. This is what I want to get to. Pursue them with your tempest. Frighten them with your storm. Fill their faces with shame. Give me the next verse. That they may seek your name, O Lord. Now, we're asking God to fill their faces with shame. We're going to read a couple verses. I'm going to drive you crazy. We're going to read the next verse and then jump back to this one. So let's take a look. Fill their faces. No, go back. Fill their faces with shame that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and dismayed forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish. Interesting. We ask God to fill their faces with shame twice. You notice that? The truth is in the Hebrew it's 3 times. Where it says let them be dismayed forever, that word also really means shame. So we ask God repeatedly to fill their faces, to make them ashamed. Anytime there's repetition in the Bible, that's the Bible's way of emphasizing a point. The Bible does not have italics or underline or bold. Okay, the Bible emphasizes things by repeating them. Okay, that's an important lesson. When you're reading the Bible carefully, look for repetition. Look for where you're told something that you already knew. Okay? That's where there's emphasis. That's like the Bible underlining something. Okay? This is, keep that in your pocket for your Bible study. When the Bible repeats, it's emphasizing. You notice I'm repeating now? Okay. So what does this mean? Why are we so into making our enemies feel ashamed? Like, look, frankly, I just want my enemies to leave me alone. I want them to be defeated. Why is it so important to me that they feel ashamed? Which is just like piling on. Not only do I want to defeat them, I want them to be ashamed. Let me explain why. Shame is a very important and actually positive emotion. Positive? Yes, positive. Let me explain. When we talk about someone who doesn't feel ashamed, say someone has no shame, we usually don't mean it as a compliment, right? That guy has got no shame. What do we mean? You see, I'm going to give you a definition of shame. Listen very carefully to this. If you haven't been paying attention till now, if you've been spacing out, this is a good time to come back in and listen. This is worthwhile, okay? So elbow the person who's asleep next to you. Here's a definition of shame. Listen carefully. Shame is the gap, the distance between how you see yourself and what you've done wrong. Let me say that again. Shame is the gap, is the size of the amount of shame that someone feels, is the distance between what they've done wrong and how they see themselves. Let me give you an example. If I've never lied in my life, I'm a very honest person. I wish I could say that. If I've never ever lied and I lie, I feel like really ashamed. You ever do a sin for the first time and you feel like really, right? And what happens if I lie again? I don't feel that as much. And what happens if I lie again? I get to a point where I feel no shame at all. Why? What happened? the gap between who I am and what I've done wrong is shrinking. And when there's no gap, I don't feel any shame. So if I'm a liar, I lie all the time, and that's who I am, and I lie, I don't feel any shame. But if I've never lied because I'm an honest person and I lie, there's a big gap between how I see myself and what I've done. I feel shame. Which is why when people find faith later in life, they often feel retroactive shame for things that they weren't ashamed of when they first did them. Because when they did them, there was no gap between what they did and how they saw themselves. Now they've changed, and they look back at what they did, and they go, whoa, and they feel ashamed. Okay? So shame is the distance, is a measure of the gap between what you've done wrong and how you see yourself. We want our enemies to feel ashamed. It's so emphasized that 3 times at the end of this psalm, we're asking God to make them feel ashamed. You know why? Because we care about them. We don't want only to defeat them. We want them to change and realize that what they've done is so evil that they feel ashamed. Because right now, those kids on those college campuses wearing keffiyehs, calling for the destruction of Israel, are anything but ashamed. They are so self-righteous and so proud of themselves that they are taking this position. They are so wrong. We want them to feel ashamed because we want them to recognize what they've done is wrong. And that brings us to the end of the psalm. That they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the most high over all the earth. That is the punchline of this psalm. The punchline of this psalm isn't Israel wins. The punchline of this psalm is that God is revealed as the true God over all the earth. That is the purpose of war. The purpose of war is to bring evil to its knees so that they change. People ask, if I could bring this into current events, people sometimes ask, like, how do you destroy Hamas? How do you destroy an idea? How do you destroy, this evil? Folks, we have 2 examples in the 20th century of an absolutely evil ideology being destroyed and the people changing quickly. And they were both in World War II. Imperial Japan, which was an evil genocidal culture and ideology, and Nazi Germany. And both of those nations, very quickly after World War II, became benign, peaceful nations. What happened? What happened to the evil ideologies? Well, here's a harsh truth, folks. Here's a harsh truth. The reason that those cultures changed is that they suffered defeat. It was clear that they were defeated. There was no way around the fact that they were defeated. And defeat made the people go, oh my gosh. And they reevaluated. If they're not defeated, they're not going to change the way they think. So when people ask, why do you have to wipe out Hamas completely? Haven't you done enough damage to them? Why do you have to go into Rafah and wipe out the last 4 battalions? We must defeat them, because if we don't defeat them to the point that it's clear to them and all their people that they were defeated, they're not going to change the way they think. They're not going to get to the end of the psalm where they feel ashamed and realize what they did is evil and turn to God. That is what war is about, folks. The last thing I'm going to share with you, and then I'll turn it back to Pastor, is the book of Joel. See, we're clearly living in a biblical time. Everyone wants to live in biblical times, right? But that doesn't mean when we say that, we want the good stuff. It doesn't mean that we want the rough stuff. But we're living in a clearly biblical time. Like, people ask me, like, how do you know that this is the big end times war? I'm like, okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if it isn't, then it means we're just waiting for another war just like this. This is a war where the enemies of Israel are trying to destroy Israel, and the whole world is involved in this massive struggle session over Israel about what is good and what is evil. The other side thinks that they're good and we're evil. And this goes back to my question I opened with about Christmas and Easter. It's very clear that there's 2 camps right now in the world. And in the book of Joel, chapter 3, Joel speaks of judgment day at the end times. And look at this. For behold, in those days, and at that time, I will bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem. In other words, the ingathering of Israel will happen. Great, that's happened, check. And I will gather the nations and bring them to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, this is a little bit of a play on words that if you don't know Hebrew, you miss. The word valley, emek, also is from the same root as the word amok, which means depth. The word valley doesn't really mean valley in Hebrew. It means depth. Jehoshaphat, Jeho, that prefix means God. Sounds like the beginning of God's name, Jeho, right? Jeho, and Shaphat is the Hebrew word for judgment. So really, the valley of Jehoshaphat is a play on words that actually means the depth of God's judgment. So God's talking about judgment day. I'm going to bring all the nations to the valley of Jehoshaphat, to the depth of God's judgment, and I will enter into judgment with them. Now, what's God going to judge the nations on? How sexually immoral they were, how much they stole from the poor. What is he judging the nations on? He says what he's judging them on. I will judge them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and also they divided up my land. Now let's pause for a second. Empires swept across the earth, they conquered other nations. Were they in the business of dividing up lands? They wanted to own them. Who divides up a land? What kind of strange desire is that? Oh, I'm going to conquer that land and chop it up and divide it. It's a weird thing to say, but it's today's headlines. The Biden administration, the world media, they're all calling for Israel to divide up the land. A two-state solution, as though that's a solution to anything, to set up a terrorist state. But they're literally talking about pressuring Israel to divide up the land. This verse made no sense for thousands of years, and today it's right there in the papers. Folks, we are in it right now. And every single person here has to ask themselves, why was I chosen to live at this time? What am I called to do? We are in this together. Our enemies know it. Our enemies make it very clear that Christians and Jews are in this together. And it's about time we all noticed it too. So folks, I'm going to turn things back to the pastor now. I just want to thank you for your friendship. I want to thank you for your concern, and I want to implore you to recognize that in addition to the private, personal aspects of our faith, we are being called right now to look at the big picture of God's story, which is playing out right now, and we have a role to play in it. So keep praying for Israel, keep standing with Israel, keep being confident in the truth of the Word of God, and read your Bible carefully. Thank you very much once again, Faith Family. I can't wait till my next time. God bless you.